You're listening to the North American Soccer Network, online at nasn.tv.
This is John Strong. You're listening to Soccer Made in Portland.
Welcome Timbers owner and president, Merritt Paulson.
This might take away your Merritt Paulson tweets segment.
No, we already did the Merritt Paulson Twitter update just to make sure we got it in. Garth Lagerway, Real Salt Lake General Manager.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate you having me on.
An interview that we did with Kenny Cooper.
Thanks so much. Appreciate you guys. Thanks for the kind words.
Jim Rylett, he is the Timbers U23 coach.
For whatever reason, you have Kelly there because he's really not very good at what he does.
Opinions, yes. Factual information, that remains to be seen.
That's never stopped us before.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Soccer Made in Portland, where there is breaking news at this exact moment. The Timbers have just signed Steven Evans as a homegrown player. Wasn't really expecting that, but it literally just came through like 1 second ago. So I guess we'll touch on that for a second, but we're mostly here to talk about Caleb Porter. This is Mal speaking, and Kelly McLean is here as well. Our first show in the new year. Kelly, how are you? Or how have you been since I saw you like an hour ago?
Quite well. New year, back on the Timbers news flowing in. I'm excited, ready to get going. Should be fun.
Absolutely, yeah. I wasn't really expecting to hear some news about homegrown players, although, to be fair, Caleb Porter did mention very specifically that the homegrown player method of player acquisition would be ramped up now that he is the manager, and that, I mean, it literally took like an hour for them to announce the first one. I mean, I guess he was already signed probably, and they were just waiting. So that's an interesting move for the Timbers. One that I think has been kind of talked about a little bit as a possibility, just given his status as an under-23 player. He's at University of Portland. He's been in the system with the Timbers sort of in the same way as Brent Richards was. So that's a little bit interesting to hear. But mostly we, like I said, are going to talk about Caleb Porter. I should mention this is, of course, the North American Soccer Network. It's been, I guess, 3 weeks since we've been with you, or two. Something like that. It was before Christmas. Yeah, it's been a little while. So we encourage you to go to the site, nasn.tv, a little bit of a revamp over there, a bunch of new shows and new ways to follow MLS. Obviously, everything kind of building now that the league's training camps are set to begin in about a week. So lots of good shows to check out. And of course, if you want to get in touch with us, you can do so via Twitter at SoccerMadeInPDX, or on Facebook. You can send us emails. It's all the access to iTunes and RSS. It's all available. Finally, this day in Timbers history, January 8th, 1979, the Timbers drafted Bruce Gant as their number one draft pick. Not expecting the Timbers to have a number one draft pick this year, but that was kind of an interesting one. His brother already played for the team. Canadian guy, had been at Simon Fraser. And of course, his and his brother Brian's niece is Christine Sinclair, who is certainly famous in her own right, both here in Portland and internationally, playing for Canada and everywhere, soccer-wise. So, okay, Caleb Porter. Kelly, go.
I think I was impressed. To be honest with you, I thought at first he was very, very nervous. But I'm not sure if that was more his just sort of general demeanor. I mean, I have not seen a lot of Caleb Porter. I haven't, I must admit, I haven't seen him do many interviews anywhere or anything. So I'm not sure of just his general, in front of camera persona, talking with the media. But my first reaction was that he looked very nervous. But as the press conference went on, I wasn't quite as certain that he was nervous. As just that's just the way he comes across, and his speech patterns and whatnot. But I was impressed. I liked a lot of the answers that he had. He kind of seemed to show the whole gamut of answers. I think one answer kind of got a little jokey laugh. I think he threw in some cliches. He was brutally honest here and there. He sort of seemed to have covered everything in that press conference. So I think it was a good first press conference and good introduction to him. What'd you think?
Yeah, he didn't have any problem talking, and I'm also not very familiar with his press conferences or things like that at Akron. So he had absolutely no problem going on and on and on. He might actually be a good guest for this show, given his sort of penchant for covering a lot of ground. I mean, he said a lot of interesting things, and as you mentioned, some real honest answers on some stuff. But the thing that struck me the most after that sort of initial period, as you said, of sort of seeming a little bit nervous, is his voice almost cracked a couple times. Just kind of, I think he was just, the lights were shining. He looked like he was maybe sweating a little bit and stuff. But once he seemed to get a little bit more comfortable and got through his sort of little statement and was just answering questions, he was the most confident, borderline arrogant person I've ever heard in person. I mean, everything he said, and not in a bad way necessarily, only in a bad way if they do really poorly, because everything he said was, we are going to do this. You will see a system. You will see consistency. You will see this. Like any good coach, this. I mean, everything he said about himself was very reverential. I mean, and the guy's got a track record that backs it up, right? I mean, he's the sort of the most successful men's college coach in the last, say, half decade. He's developed a lot of stars, which he made sure to point out. And again, I don't think any of those things are bad, but they're very different. And we kind of talked about it ahead of time, or a couple weeks ago, or last year, whenever. That we were kind of interested to see what he's like, because every coach is different. Everybody's personality is a little different, the way they handle questions. He had some weird inflection in his voice. The occasional word would just be way louder than everything else around it. And so, yeah, it'll take some getting used to, I think, for media and fans alike to sort of pick up on his cues on what is he hinting at or what is he saying. But there was some stuff he didn't want to answer, and that was made pretty clear. There was some other stuff that he felt very comfortable talking about. But the one thing I have to say that was really disappointing to me about the press conference was not the idea that he didn't want to talk about last season, because I can understand that. That's not his team. That's not, I mean, while he had an influence on kind of who played and stuff, like the composition of the team, the to some degree, the playing style, all that stuff, that's not really his team. And so what he takes over starting next week or whenever, is something that he can kind of take ownership of. So I can understand not wanting to associate himself with the failure of the team in 2012, but using the sort of Mark McGuire, I'm not here to talk about the past routine, and doing it more than once. It's one thing if it just pops in your head and it's just the cliche and you just say it because you're trying to answer a question, but he used it more than once. And I found that really frustrating. I mean, nobody is nailing last year's failures to him. He doesn't have to skirt it completely, and to sort of say that, oh, we're not focusing on anything in the past. I mean, that's a little unfair to say, considering most of the team is still going to be made up of guys from the previous season who are only still on the team because he judged them to be good enough to be part of his new system. So that was a little disappointing to me, but I can understand kind of how it comes off a little bit harsher than maybe he meant it. But otherwise, impressive stuff. 40-minute press conference, which I don't think that'll be the norm, but that was a lot.
Yeah, I would have like you mentioned, the stuff about last year. I think I would have liked at least an example, a specific or two of some things that, he was asked, what did you see that, you want to address or fix or anything of that nature. I would have liked to have heard something out of that. But again, that's a place where you have to tread carefully, because people are only going to hear that as, well, John Spencer did this and that was no good and I'm going to change it. So it's difficult to answer a question like that and not have it turned into, that guy did it that way and that was wrong, and so I'm going to do it this way. So I guess, like you said, you can't really blame him, but it would have been nice to have had some idea of some specifics of what he saw that he knows he wants to alter or change in some way.
Yeah, and we saw Gavin Wilkinson do the same thing when he took over as interim manager, just saying, look, I know certain things that I could answer here are going to just be spun in a way that makes it look like everything was John's fault, even if that's not the point of what I'm saying. Now, one thing that I thought was very interesting, Jeffrey Arnold of the Oregonian asked him sort of in a roundabout way, what formation are you going to play? And that he sort of understood that Porter is wedded to a 4-3-3. And I thought Porter was pretty clear that he isn't. And to be fair, he basically said the same thing in the 2-part interview he had with Brian Costello, came out this week, saying that, look, I've used a 4-4-2. He's very specifically said, I was at Akron for 7 years. 2 of them, I mainly used a 4-3-3. The other 5, I used a 4-4-2. But because most people, because he appeared on most people's radar sort of nationally, relatively recently, and with a team that did play a 4-3-3, and then again using the same thing with the U23 team in Olympic qualifying last year, that has sort of now been laid on him as this guy is a 4-3-3 guy. He talked a little bit about it today, about how he's more of a style guy than a system guy, that he's willing to work with the players he has. And I don't think that should be any surprise. I mean, I think we've been kind of talking about that for a while, that he's going to have to use who he has on some level until he can totally turn over the roster into a fully functioning arm of his sort of blueprint, as he said over and over again. But yeah, I mean, did that surprise you that he came out and said that, or what did you think about his ideas about actual formations and actual playing styles?
Yeah, I don't know if I was surprised by it. I mean, I think anytime any coach, probably regardless of the sport, I think anytime you find that you're being pigeonholed as, this guy or this guy, I think it's natural to try to say that, well, I don't only do this one thing. I mean, look at the LA Lakers and D'Antoni. I mean, everybody's saying that he's just an offensive guy, and how many times have we heard him say, no, we do defense and we work on this stuff and I know how to do this. And so you don't want to be pigeonholed as like some specific, this is the only thing that you can do. So I'm not surprised at all that he would do that he would, say that he's used other systems and that he's familiar with other systems. But I don't think it's also out of bounds for people to say that, to expect that he's sort of coming in with the 4-3-3 sort of mindset based on exactly the reasons, that you outlined. So not surprised by that. Interesting, though, to see how it will all work out, especially with, I guess we don't know if player moves are done or yet not, but as we've talked about before, what's happening with the defense, and are there more players coming in, or is Jack Jewsbury going to be a right outside back? What happens there, and then how do you use this myriad of options that you now apparently have with your midfields and your forwards? How do you get all that to work, and will it be best used as a 4-4-2 or some sort of modified, 4-1, something and that sort of thing. So it's going to be really interesting to see where he does go with all of this and who ends up where.
Yeah, given the number of midfielders that they have, they're almost going to have to start with the assumption of playing with 4 in the midfield somehow in some configuration, because they just got too many guys at the moment. Now, some of them may end up leaving between now and the time the show ends, or Friday or whatever. But, at the moment, and someone sort of asked about a couple of things, and he said, oh, well, time, how much time is it going to take to do this and this? And he said, no, time will tell. Well, that's a stupid answer, but unfortunately that's the answer, right? He hasn't even had one training session yet, let alone any of us giving a chance to see who's doing well, who seems frustrated, who seems comfortable, any of that stuff. So it is sort of a wait and see situation. But I think he did the right thing by leaving his options open and not saying you'll see a 4-3-3 on day one, or not, or by saying you'll definitely not see it. He's going to sort of it's interesting. He kind of wrapped cliches into a more eloquent way of saying it. He basically said over and over again, we're going to take it one game at a time, which is like the worst cliche. But that's kind of what he kept saying. But he said it in a way that made it sound more confident and more comfortable, and like there was more of a plan behind it than just taking it one game at a time. But that's kind of what he was saying, is that like, well, don't nail me down to anything, because we have to see the opponent, we have to see who's playing well, we have to see who we have. So I think at this point, that's probably where that stands. Now, of course, naturally, there were a bunch of questions about Darlington Nagby. You've got written down here, there were probably about 5 too many about Nagby. I know some people are writing articles about him, Nagby, so I understand some of the questions. But what did you make of his comments about his relationship with Darlington, and whether or not that factored in, or how that will impact his sort of position difficulties that he's had, or anything like that?
Well, yeah, that was one of the things I want to go back and listen to it at some point, because there was some comment along the lines of, like, Darlington wasn't my favorite player or something like that. I forget exactly how he phrased it, but there was something along the lines of, Darlington wasn't my most favorite player to coach ever, but yada yada yada. And I forget exactly how he said that, which I thought was interesting. I thought he was, I was glad that he didn't just give the standard Darlington's got a lot of potential and rah 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 and we're going to get the most out of him. I thought that was one of the instances where he was a little bit frank, and you could tell in his answer that, he's impressed with Darlington, and Darlington's a good player, but he's going to expect more out of him. And, he's going to give him a chance to play, but he's going to have to earn his minutes just like everybody else. And he can do more, and, he can play better. I thought that was one of those instances where he sort of gave a more of a frank, honest sort of answer, which I was glad to see, because it seems like every time anybody talks about Darlington, it's that same, like, man, it's all there. That potential's all there, and we just got to give him the time, and we got to get him on the field with the right players and in the right spot, and he's going to be great, and and rah, rah, rah. I was glad that he kind of toned it down a little bit and just said, Darlington's going to have to play well.
Yeah, and that's basically what he said about everyone, which leads us into a little bit of a discussion that he had about Bright Dike, and then we'll use that to springboard into the most interesting stuff that went down in the whole day. But no, he was asked, and I suppose we're going to talk about this in the opposite order in which it was asked at the press conference. But he was asked about Bright Dike, and basically Caleb kind of laid out what his preferred attributes were for strikers, that they would be sort of, I think he said, pacey and sort of physically strong and able to get in behind a back four and things like that. And sort of then was asked about, well, is that why we saw a lot of Bright Dike last year? And he kind of said, well, sort of, and then kind of talked about, well, look, Bright does kind of fit a lot of those characteristics. I mean, he's a handful, which is the sort of, you can just kind of insert that into anybody's comments about Bright Dike and feel comfortable that that's what they were going to say. But it's true, obviously, and Bright did well and did show, in maybe not a carbon copy of what we'll see in 2013 and forward, at least an ability to play and function in a system that is closer to Caleb Porter's than John Spencer's. And Caleb pointed out, look, tactically and sort of technically, he's got a lot of things to work on. But yeah, I kind of like a player of his stature, which, with the news today that I think it's official, maybe it's not quite yet, but that Bright isn't going to be going to the African Cup of Nations with Nigeria despite his nice performance against Catalunya last week. I think that's actually the best for Bright in the circumstances. I mean, he's going to get other opportunities, with Nigeria in the future if he keeps playing well. But the best way to do that is to come and perform with the Timbers, get time on the field. And the best way to do that is to be in camp and healthy and ready to go on day one and impress Porter in person. And so I think I thought that was a little bit interesting the way he talked about Bright. But obviously the sort of elephant in the room, in every room, everywhere in Portland is Kris Boyd. And without getting into specifics about it, Caleb Porter was asked, how does Kris Boyd fit into your style? So why don't you recap kind of how that went?
And he basically said that, well, he doesn't. He said he's seen a lot of tape of Kris Boyd, and honestly, he feels like it's going to be a struggle for Boyd to fit into the type of system that Porter wants to run, which is what a lot of people have been saying for a very long time. So nothing new there, but I think the whole interaction and the way it was said, brings up that question of what's going to happen with Boyd, because I think it's hard for people to see and hear the response to the Boyd question and imagine that he's going to be here, and if he is, have any real opportunity to play. I mean, it just doesn't seem like the way you answer that question, if you honestly in any way believe that Kris Boyd is going to show up on day one and have an equal shot at getting minutes. I just don't think you answer that question in that way if that's the case. So, I mean, I guess it was an official, unofficial announcement to 18 other GMs that you can come make an offer for this guy. Maybe that's what it was. I don't know, but that was a little bizarre.
Well, and the most bizarre part about it was the fact that he didn't answer the question immediately by saying anything about on-field or anything. The first thing he did after pausing for a really uncomfortable 3 seconds was saying something to the effect of, well, Kris Boyd is contractually obligated to be on this team. And if that's the first thing you say in regard to any player, that's not good. That is not very good at all. So I found the whole exchange very interesting. There are obviously rumors out there about other players coming in. Merritt Paulson tweeted this morning that the Timbers would be announcing the signing of another designated player this week. Yeah, in order for that to happen, and that they would be wrapping up Jose Valencia in the next 24 hours. Now, we don't know whether his status will change from being a young DP. He's no longer eligible for the youngest DP designation, which is 20 years and younger. The next level is 21 to 23, and that bumps up to $200,000 instead of 150. We're not sure yet if he's still going to be that, but if he is, that means either Kris Boyd or Diego Chara is either not going to be on the team or not going to be a designated player. And that someone else will be coming in. That could be Diego Valeri. It could still conceivably be Mix Discarud. It could be someone else that we don't even know about. We'll have to see about that. And we are, by the way, planning on having a show on Friday at some point, assuming that a couple of other moves will be made. We'll have more time to talk about Steven Evans and stuff like that. We haven't even mentioned the Robbie Findlay trade or the rights, whatever, and we'll get back to that on Friday. But yeah, it was a fascinating thing to see happen, and just the discomfort with which everybody who was sitting, well, everybody being both people who were sitting at that table in front of the media, the way they looked so uncomfortable and so uninterested in answering that question. I've never seen anything like that, to be asked flat out and be so unbelievably just almost put off by the question and even the idea that Kris Boyd could somehow fit into this or any system that Caleb Porter would ever consider using. Now, he did throw out there, well, I mean, he could play really well in someone else's system, which was kind of like, it's almost like, obviously they've thought about it more than this, or at least you hope, but, it's kind of like they kind of like whacked him out at the knees, Boyd, and took away any possible trade value by saying he stinks and he can't possibly play in this system. And then they sort of remembered, but if you want him in your system, he'd be pretty good, I think.
He'd be pretty good.
So obviously there's more to come on all of that, hopefully before training camp starts, because it just doesn't seem like it's a tenable situation at this point for either party, although the money makes it still the most likely thing that he's under contract with the Timbers in some way.
Yeah, they may just end up having to, bide their time for a year and eat that salary and who knows what. And, if that's the way it goes down and Kris doesn't see any playing time, he's certainly more than welcome to come join me on my indoor team. I provide wonderful service. You can ask everybody on my team. I provide wonderful service. He could score a lot of goals. I did sort of notice Porter's consistency word that he used. That was a big theme for him, this idea of consistency. He talked in regards to the players that have been brought in as well, having some experience so that they can provide that consistency because they've been through it all before. They've been through the travel before and they've been successful in it. I thought that was sort of a key sort of underlying current throughout all of his comments that I sort of latched onto a little bit. I'm trying to think of other sort of things. I want to go back and listen to the whole thing and, make some notes. I'm sure you and I will have more to chat about either Friday or next week. We might even, write something up as our, thoughts as we get to let them sink in a little bit. But any other lasting sort of thoughts that you had from first impressions?
Not really. I just thought he was an interesting, impressive guy that's totally different from the previous coaches that have been here in MLS. And I did find it a little bit interesting, though, that Merritt Paulson wasn't sitting at the table. I found it interesting that he technically wasn't available for questions, even though a few people tried to get him to answer questions. And he did hilariously volunteer to answer a question about referees, which was obviously a joke. I thought he would be a bigger part of that, and I think it said something that he had Gavin sitting up there by himself with Caleb, and basically putting those two guys out there as the sort of more public face of the Timbers, even though everybody knows that Merritt's very involved, and they talked about that. Caleb talked about that in particular, but no, I thought it was good that he's finally here, good that he's finally on the record saying something other than, the Timbers Army's great, and I can't wait to get there, just to have something down, something to hold him to, and just get an idea of what kind of a guy he is, what his plan actually is. We'll see more of it once we can see people on the field, both in training and in games. But unfortunately, we're out of time. We're just doing a little half-hour show today just to make sure we got something in to talk about the press conference. But as we mentioned, we will be back on Friday at some point. We'll advise at what time. But we'll be able to talk more about player movement. We should hear more on that front in the next couple of days. So join us then on NASN.TV for Soccer Made in Portland. We'll talk to you Friday. This is Mao.
And this is Kelly. We'll see you later.
Yep, speak to you then.